I often say that the the last spiritual assignment for a parent is to get out of the way and take the loss of their children, right? It's not the child's job to cushion the blow. Let's face it, your kid loves you, there's nothing like it, right? And it's different than a spouse. And so if you've got an underdeveloped parent, an undeveloped mother in this case, I'm a little girl on the inside and an adult, but not really a full adult. The little girl in me is turned on by my child. You confront the belief, you break through the denial, you educate yourself, and you shift the responsibility in your mind to your parent. This is not my job, take care of you. And you don't worry about negotiating it. So emancipation is not a negotiation. You do not need your parents' co-signature on this. It'd be nice to get their blessing, but don't go into family therapy or therapy with your mother. It'll feel like couples therapy. This is not about going home and grabbing your parents by the lapels and shaking them and saying, look, you guys smothered me, I want my own life. It's having your own life and letting them deal with it.
I just found this stuff so interesting because it's a world removed away from where I am. I mean, I had a relatively probably vanilla, normal-ish, if you can say that about anybody's childhood, kind of relationship with my parents. But what you write about in the book, I just never, this world was totally foreign to me. As an adult, I have a couple of friends who will say things like, yeah, I'm dealing with my mother and I. It turns out my therapist says I'm emotionally enmeshed or whatever. And I was like, what is that? And I got as far as Google and then being like, oh, okay, your mom's overbearing. But that's not quite what this is, right? There's helicopter parents and tiger moms and whatever, but this is a totally different animal. Can you define what emotional enmeshment is? It's almost like a euphemism for something that's a little bit more severe.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant start. I couldn't agree with you more. And we do want to differentiate sort of the normality of occasional over-involvement or overshadowing a kid or sticking your nose where it doesn't belong and so forth from enmeshment. Enmeshment is, and you probably have noticed it's a word that's getting used in the popular culture more. You see it pop up over and over again with different things. So-and-so sports star is enmeshed with his coach or something. So I was curious to watch that. But it means, typically, in a broad way, it means too much involvement at a cost to the individuality of the person or both parties in that enmeshed system. And it crosses a line in this way. When we talk about mother-son enmeshment, for example, or parent-child enmeshment, that love is transactional and obligatory. You owe me. I love you and you owe me. And I'm your higher power, right? So it's nowhere near the normality you're talking about. So if I took all the cases that I've seen over the years in my workshops, for example, about 700 guys at this point from all around the world, different cultures, what they all have in common is a parent who became the higher power, the God in their life, and demanded a degree of, if not totality of, obligatory loyalty that was transactional, and that my love was dependent upon your willingness to support me, not leave me, stabilize me, love me, and be my good boy at a cost to whoever you have in your life, your partner, your spouse, your kids, right? So I get emails all the time from spouses and partners of these guys saying, look, I've been thrown under the bus for decades. I can't stand it anymore. What do I do? So it is a deeper cut and a different experience than what you had just talked about. And certainly there's a continuum, right? You can have somebody over-involved, but in these enmeshed systems, the parent has failed to do, it's been mistaken for love and closeness over the years. Sometimes people think that these enmeshed family systems are actually close, and what they are is over-involved. And love is transactional and not freely given. And so that's one of the big mistakes in enmeshment. When I first, my first professional practicum was at Children's Hospital in Detroit. I'm from Michigan, still in Michigan.
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
Troy. I grew up in Troy. Did we talk about this? I don't think we did.
I think we did. So I don't know. My practice is in Royal Oak. I live in Rochester, so we're neighbors of sorts.
Indeed.
Are you still in Michigan?
No, I live in California now, but
Oh,
I
okay.
was
Okay.
born in Royal Oak, so it's
I'll be
funny. Yeah,
there.
you're right
Yeah,
next
it's
door.
amazing. Well, we're meant to be here.
How does this happen, right? Is this something where the parent is sort of predisposed to this because of their own upbringing, or does it have to do with the relationship that they're in with the child's parent? And then it's like, well, let me just transfer this over to you. You know, is there what's going on to
So
develop
there's a
this?
number of setting factors. You could have a parent with a personality disorder issue, overly dependent, overly narcissistic, right? They don't see the child for who they are. They can come from their own enmeshed background. They could have mental illness. There could be addiction in the family. So usually a dysfunctional, a marital bond or a relational bond between the parents is a factor, right? That's a common denominator where one of the parents is checked out for one reason or another, and then the neediness, the need, the anxiety, the depression of the other parent gets transferred to the almost always the sensitive soul in the sibship, the siblings, right? It's almost one of the kids who has a sensitive temperament, meaning that they tend to be more generally empathic, sensitive, and attuned just by temperament. And those are the kids that will be drawn to say, Mommy, what's the matter with you? And I know what I was going to talk about. My first practicum was at Children's Hospital in Detroit. And we saw school phobic kids. And I said to my supervisor, these kids aren't afraid of school. They can't leave their mothers. And we'd have them into family therapy sessions. And we began to see these psychosomatic issues and school phobia related to the fact that these sensitive souls were absorbing their mother's worries and pain, and they couldn't separate because they were worried. Now, a lot of kids have early separation issues. That's not by itself pathological, right? Kids vary in their ability to separate at kindergarten and so forth. But these kids just couldn't do it. They were like, and we see that in adulthood. These kids grow up and they're still tethered to their parents, right? And they're making compromises. It's my anniversary weekend, and I'm going to go change my mother's light bulb this weekend because she can't do without me, right? And so we chuckle, and you think that's just a dramatic example, but the truth is we've had stories like that. I'm laughing. It's not funny because these guys don't feel like they have a choice. It really isn't a laughing matter, you know. None of these guys are laughing when they're in the workshop. That's for sure.
Yeah. No. What is the? I hate that I'm smiling during this, but it reminds me of that John Candy movie. What is that movie where he's enmeshed with his mother and she can't do anything without him and he can't go on dates without bringing his mom? And it's
right. I can't remember.
I think it might be called Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, or I could be getting confused because I've seen all.
That's a different one.
Only the lonely.
That makes way more sense.
Oh.
That makes way more sense than my guess. Yeah, and he brings his mom on a date, and the girl's like, "Okay, this is weird, but fine." And then what are you going to order? She's like, "Well, I want the lobster." And the mom's like, "I'll fill up on bread here. This place is too expensive," and it just it's ruining the whole date. But I realize that it's not funny in reality at all because of why this happens. It's got to be, there's kind of no not sad reason that a parent would have to use their child as an object to fulfill their needs emotionally, right?
No, that's right. It's really none of it really adds up to a legitimate deal. I mean, there are some immigrant families who kind of bond together when they're in Western cultures. You know, I mean, some of this, you'll see a sort of cohesion, enmeshment sometimes temporarily in cultures that are first generation and so forth, but eventually people kind of find their way. But beyond that, there aren't a lot of legitimate reasons. I often say that the last spiritual assignment for a parent is to get out of the way and take the loss of their children, right? It's not the child's job to cushion the blow. You know, my son's 21, out of state in college right now, moving to LA actually, and at the end of college, I believe. And the more I get out of his way, the more he wants to circle back and consult with me. If I try to impose my opinion, he wants nothing to do with the old man, right? So in these enmeshed systems, it's the opposite, right? I demand that you are my audience, and that I am the one dictating terms. So it's more than just the funny movie of John Candy taking his mother on a date. These parents will interject directly and criticize partners. That she's not good enough for you, right? Don't you forget that. There'll be always an undermining, and the motivation behind that is, don't you leave me. Don't you dare leave me. right? And sometimes it's explicit. I remember a story once that one of the guys came to the workshop. He was having trouble with his wife, and his mother called and says, just divorce her and get out so we can get on with our life together.
Oh,
So
that's so weird.
I mean, so these are not so I could walk you through multiple examples like that, but it's almost like eye color. Like I got these 700 guys from across the globe coming into these workshops, and every single one of them are ambivalent about commitment. Right. I don't know what I think or what I want because I've been absorbed by my mother's needs and feelings. And now I'm confused. Is she good for me? Or my mother says she's not? I don't know where I end and my mother's opinion begins. So the relationship to desire, romantic desire, sexual desire, any passionate involvement, even careers can be waylaid.
So then in that case, the parent-child relationship, as you describe it, becomes a kind of emotional or psychological marriage, right? Where the child becomes the parent's surrogate spouse because oftentimes there wasn't that healthy bond between parents or there were other variables like the personality of the child, and the relationship can become sexually energized and occasionally violating, as you write it, even without the presence of overt incest, sexual innuendo, sexual touch, or conscious sexual feelings on the part of the parent. But does this apply to men and women, or is this only something that happens between men and their mothers?
So the good question. I'm going to hit both of them. The first part, I want to kind of expand what you're talking about, which is critical, is the sexualization without sexual touch. But so we see, I don't want to pick on mothers. My wife's a mother and she's a good one, but we see mothers and sons and mothers and daughters most frequently and to some degree. So we'll see mothers and sons in which the son plays sort of on a continuum. On one end of the continuum, he's her emotional caretaker. Don't worry, mommy, I won't leave you. I'll stabilize you. You don't have to be lonely. I'm sorry you're depressed. Don't kill yourself. So he's organized as a caretaker. On the other end, he's her boyfriend. He goes on dates. So we've got guys reporting to us that the mother would take him on dates. And she would prance him around in circles, take him to the movies and dinner, and literally be on his arm without any overt sexual touch, And so you have a continuum. One end is the sexualized boyfriend. One step before that's the surrogate husband. I'm better than daddy, which is a loss to the man. If the kid bests the father, and the mother uses him to best the father, it's a double loss. You lose your mother's love because she's not supposed to be doing that to you. And now you're in competition with the old man and you've overridden him and now you lose him.
Right, yeah. It would be very weird for a guy to stick around in a relationship like that with his wife treating his son like that. And he's like, is this my son or is it my wife's boyfriend who lives in our house? I want out of here. This is very odd.
Precisely.
Yeah. It seems like also the son it would be so hard to have a real relationship with somebody because you're thinking, like, even if you're dating or married to somebody, it would be weird because your pattern for relationships is your mom. So do you really want to sleep with that woman and feel passionate for your wife and have kids with her? But then but it's like, it's one step away from your mom. It's just it would be such a weird thing to do.
Yep. Well, you put your finger right in the middle of the pulse of why it's inappropriate sexually, right? So starting back, let's walk ourselves back a minute here. So, all children fall. I don't know if you guys are parents, but
I am.
Kids fall in love with their parents, right? They want to marry, have babies with their parents, and and they're not watching Disney. Disney's not teaching them that, and they're not reading Freud. It's just wired, right?
Sure.
It's just hardwired that your first love affair, in a very simplistic way, is your parent, right? And then you have your crush at school, maybe a crush on a teacher, kind of unfolds. Hopefully nobody abuses you, and you have a peer-to-peer relationship, and you kind of marry your lust, your biological lust, with your ability to love, and they kind of link together, and you kind of can manage the deal, right? Imperfectly for many of us, but basically you can keep track of it on your own behalf. Well, if mom says, "Oh boy, my little son loves me," my son wanted to marry my wife when he was 5, and it's just the way it is, And but if a mother says, "Oh, he adores me, I'm going to use him," right? So I'm going to make sure, oh, you're very cute, you're very sweet. Does mommy look good? Why don't you pull up my dress? And pretty soon there's an involvement that goes too far and too long. And now I'm getting jealous that you have a crush at school.
Mm.
So now it's complicated and contaminated. And you're right. So now I download that erotic romantic story and I take it out into the world when I'm 20 years old. And now I'm confused. I'm conflicted. So maybe I can love you, but I can't have sex with you, but I can have sex with you and not love you, right? So sometimes we'll see this splitting in these men where they can, their answer to this intrusiveness is to split off sex with non-committed situations.
It's interesting because when I first explored this, when I cracked the book, I was like, oh, this is about people whose mothers care about them just a little bit too much. But now it's not really that, right? It goes beyond that and it transcends that, and it becomes actually the care is not for the child. It's that parent's own emotional needs, sucking that out of the child. And it's kind of the opposite of caring too much. It actually has nothing really to do with the child's needs at all. And you'd mentioned earlier transactional, kind of like, well, I'm going to overinvest in this child or make it appear that I'm doing that because then later they owe me this affection or this attention or whatever. They got to fill my black hole of need emotionally or whatever. And that is the creepy pseudo incestuous thing that this ends up being.
Yeah. Well, you said it very well put. And it feels, what you just described feels icky. The word icky comes up over and over and over again. Too much closeness for too long. So we'll get stories, so sometimes the stories, I want to be careful here because sometimes some of the examples can be more dramatic and extreme, but not necessarily common, but we get guys sleeping with their mothers until they're 15 or 16, not sexually, although sometimes it crosses a line. We get guys whose sexual erotic desires involve mother, stepson, porn and fantasy, so pretty soon you see the sexualized experience emerge in the man that carries the story that was once icky. And so again, it's almost like eye color with a lot of these guys. There's no way to have your romantic sexual desire not burdened to some degree.
What do you mean by eye color? I missed that reference.
Well, I mean, it's just so common. Like if I had to pick if I had to list 10 symptoms that I've seen over 700 guys in the workshops, it'd be right there on top. It comes over and over again where my desires romantically are conflicted. Right. And it's beyond the normal. Is she or he good for me? Right. And maybe I made a mistake. This next time I'll date somebody different. Everybody has periods of questioning and exploration. This is an ongoing ambivalence and commitment issue that I just can't get right. So I've got guys who show up in my world of treatment or education, and they're 55 years old. They're great guys. Good looking, well, financially well off, have never been in love.
Mm-hmm.
Can't do it.
Can't do
it. They can't surrender. They can't let go. Both, they might be able to have a truncated sexual experience with an escort or a temporary girlfriend, but I can't really merge with my lover, because if I merge with my lover sort of emotionally and sexually, I can't leave. I'm stuck. I'm like my mother, like you said. I feel like I'm stuck and engulfed by my mother. I'm not going to do this. So we've got guys who just don't bond at the worst case, who are great souls, but they can't get the relationship down because they're so afraid of being consumed again.
That's so interesting. You wrote in the book, there's nothing loving or caring about a close parent-child relationship when it serves the needs and feelings of the parent rather than the child. Feeling close with your parents is a relationship in which the individual, both as a child and later as an adult, feels silently seduced by the parent. So that sort of speaks to what we're getting at here. I'm curious, though, what covert incest looks like in action. You know, those are the results. Okay, not being able to bond, having dysfunctional relationships in that respect. What does it look like when the child is growing up? You mentioned co-sleeping with mom until 15 or 16. That is hard to imagine. I co-sleep with my 4-year-old and my 1.5-year-old right now, and I'm kind of like, how many times do I have to have a child step on my you-know-what at 4 o'clock in the morning before we're kind of out of this phase? Don't get me wrong. It's very cute, except for getting kicked in the gonads. It's very cute, but I can't even imagine anyone would want that for a long time, especially when the kid gets older and smelly, you know, when they're 10 or 11. It's like, get out of here. Get in your own gross bed. I was disgusting at that age. I would never want anything like this, but I'm also not one of these sort of black hole of need people. And so what other symptoms are there, right? How do we know when this is too much? There's people who are close to their parents and it's totally fine. Where's the line?
Well, so, you know, I think the ultimate line is the parent. So if we really take it to a higher level, the ultimate line is the parent has become the God, right? So that's the bottom line here, is the parent has claimed an authority over the child that they don't have a right to, which is to cross whatever boundary I want. And I think we've been talking pretty liberally about the different types. So you get parents who will share intimate details about how frustrated they are, even sexually, with their husband, right? So we talk about mothers and sons here for the moment, just because it's easier. And they'll talk about, you know, your dad's not a good lover.
Oh God.
I'm glad you're, you know, we never have sex anymore. I'm glad that you are such a handsome boy. So we begin to hear things that we might in other normative systems think are affectionate. Oh, you're such a good looking kid, you know, or how'd you get so good looking, or whatever, becomes icky in the sense that it's serving, that the parent has taken their love affair too far. That they've over-romanticized their love for their child. And let's face it, your kid loves you, there's nothing like it, right? And, you know, it's different than a spouse. And so if you've got an underdeveloped parent, an undeveloped mother in this case, I'm a little girl on the inside and an adult, but not really a full adult, the little girl in me is turned on by my child, right? So there's a sort of inappropriate context. There's a romanticization of it. There's a discussion about intimate details that don't belong. There is, how do I look good? Do I look good in my nightgown? Or, you know, there's inappropriate boundary crossing that doesn't have to involve physical sexual contact, but can be sexualized. So the covert incest phrase is designed for that end of the continuum where the boy feels like the sexualized boyfriend to the mother.
Yeah. That's really, icky's a great word, because when just imagining someone's mom saying that to them, do I look good in my nightgown, is so cringy is not even quite the right word. I mean, it's really beyond inappropriate and so icky that can't not have a negative effect over a prolonged period of time. And the oversharing of like what's going on in mom's dating life or relationship with dad is so not conducive to having a functioning emotional life of their own. What about when the kid is the go-between between parents? You hear about that occasionally with people who are divorcing, but it seems like this is a little different.
Yeah, so there might be a sort of, so you're describing when a kid is kind of caught between the parents and the parents are struggling to vying for the kid's attention, competitively vying for, I think that's what you're referencing, where the dad wants time, you know, and they're fighting over the property of the child, right? Nobody's really paying attention to the feelings of the kid, but the kid becomes a piece of property, like they would fight over the bank account, right? And the kid is torn in that instance. And there's a sort of crossover where an enmeshed boy or girl who's in these enmeshed relationships or covert incest, they certainly will feel caught in between. But it tilts a little further with what we're talking about, where the one parent is using the child to stabilize themselves and to best or over compete with the other parent. In these cases where you've got a divorce situation, parents are fighting over there, certainly the kid will be a casualty in that. And they might then become, over time, the surrogate partner to the parent they get stuck with, right? So if one parent wins the child over, it may not be the victory that they really needed.
I know we asked earlier, does it happen with just mothers and sons, or are we talking about fathers and daughters, or other mixtures here? We didn't really close that loop. Do we want to do that?
Sure, we can do that. So, when we see mothers and sons, again, we're assuming heterosexual, although I've had gay men come into the workshops, and probably 10% of the guys coming in. And, one of the big misconceptions in the culture is, did this relationship with my mother cause the gayness? No, because the truth is we'd have all 690 of the guys should be gay and they're all straight. Same dynamic.
Yeah.
There's about a 10% difference. Same issues, same intimacy problems, same sexual type of issues, just the gender orientation preference is different. So with men and their mothers, we see a lot of sexual issues, when there's, and also of the father and the daughter in a heterosexual, where the daughter is the sexualized girlfriend. We'll see her have similar issues like the man, versus the woman who is her mother's best friend and surrogate partner. There we tend to see eating disorders. Lots of, I may be stuck with my mother, but I'll eat what the hell I want to eat, right? There's always a rebellious attempt. So if you're suffocated, so icky is a way to describe the end of the continuum when there's a sexualized or boyfriend or surrogate husband or wife. On the other end of the continuum is the feeling is suffocation.
And that's with the same-sex parent, right? So like a mother and a daughter.
Or actually, it could be both.
Oh, I see.
Right? So you could have somebody who felt both suffocated and sexualized. So suffocation is the broader enmeshment feeling, right? I'm suffocated by the relationship. I can't breathe. So a part of me needs to protest. So you might control me, mommy, and now you make me hate all my dad and all men because you're angry at dad and men. But now why do I have to carry that? So we sometimes see daughters carrying their mother's anger, by the way. So as will the son, right? The son may internalize her anger towards the father, and have difficulty with male friendships, for example. So, but with the daughters and and the mothers, we see this protest in eating. More likely, I'll eat what the hell I want, right? You can't have all of me. So there's always so when somebody is engulfed across their early development and they're enmeshed, suffocated, or sexualized, or all of the above, everybody has a self, right? If we were to talk a little more openly about who our selves were, we'd have interests, we'd have preferences. We have a self. You have a core of who you identify as who you are, right? But in these relationships, that gets snuffed out, man. That gets shot down and pressed down, and you become a sort of a shadow of who you are, and you become the role at which your mother or father have defined for you in need of you, because you're a sensitive soul, right? So you don't want to displease mommy or daddy, and you love them. So you're exploited. And now you have to find some way to declare your independence. Sexing, eating, other addictions become a perceived freedom, which really aren't, right? So so if you look at the statistics now, of the guys coming into the workshop, for example, the men, probably about 40 to 50% of them act out sexually outside their committed relationships, because now I was suffocated by my mother, now I'm suffocated by my wife. They kind of transfer that feeling onto their partner. And to some degree, we all can do that, right? Sometimes we react to our partners like if there was negative qualities about one of our parents. But these men are almost always doing it. They're displacing, we call it, projecting onto their partners the feelings that belong to their mothers. And so then they say, well, the hell with you, I'll betray you, I'll reject you. So they wind up betraying and rejecting the wrong woman. And the women with the mothers, they will kind of eat themselves. So I'm overstating that. There's other ways that women will protest. But we see the same issues with women and their mothers: commitment problems, codependency, always people pleasing.
People pleasing. Interesting. That makes
really
sense.
not really having my own voice, right? Marrying somebody or getting involved with somebody who won't have any interest in being intimate with me. Besides, I'm not available to be intimate. So I'm going to pick somebody who really is not really available either.
Right. And then, of course, that looks like a problem. The people-pleasing and caretaking stuff crossing over, transferring, that makes total sense, right? Because if you're doing that with your parent your whole life, you just look for a partner that wants the same stuff. And now you've got two black holes of need in your life. Gabriel, you were going to say something?
Yeah. Man, we just talked about like 4 fascinating things. So let me pick one.
We've got some open loops, yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Adams, I find it so interesting that as you move away from the icky part of the spectrum, which is much easier to identify, right? It's easier to say, oh, my mom put me in these situations that made me feel very uncomfortable. I was sexualized, or people commented on my appearance or whatever. But as you move more toward the more covert versions of this, the subtler versions of this, where perhaps you were your parents' confidant or advisor, or you had too much access to their emotional life, or, you supported them, nurtured them, cared for them. There was a real friendship there. But I think for some people, it can take years, if they ever get there at all, to realize, oh, I actually wasn't really just close with my parent. We didn't really have this beautiful collaboration or friendship going on. I was actually playing a role for this person that I didn't even understand. And then it plays out in all these ways: the people pleasing, the caretaking, the self-loathing, the feelings of inadequacy, the feelings, ironically, of abandonment, oftentimes with some of these people. And also, ironically, the emotional distance from that same-sex parent you were actually so quote unquote close with. There's so many contradictions in this dynamic. And I find it very interesting. But the sexual dysfunction that you just touched on a moment ago is perhaps one of the most interesting. You said that so many of the men you work with end up bringing those issues into your sessions or into your workshops. I can understand how a person who was raised in a house like this might become what we would consider a traditional sex addict, where the sexuality is very driven and it's very compulsive. But the opposite can also happen, where sexuality gets shut down. Why does that happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, Jordan, you alluded to it earlier, right? That if I get too close to this person, it feels like I'm with my mother, right? So this entanglement of my being so I'm going to use the phrase, Gabe, the loyal lover. So when you were talking about that individual who's listening to mom's complaints, he becomes the loyal lover who never leaves her, right? Now think about, even if we don't have a sexualized piece of it, maybe she's not talking about her dissatisfaction sexually or prancing around in her nightgown, but he grows up, right? And he's mommy's loyal lover. He's never really moved out from that role. And now it's time to be sexual with his partner. And he gets past the early phase of excitement, where everybody can be pretty much present. But then after a while, you've got to negotiate how to be both with somebody sexual and also separate, and keep that spark alive. And he can't do it because it feels like, my mother, you want too much from me. You're needy. It feels icky to me. I'm not your loyal lover. So how do I defend against that? I can't leave you. So I'll just shut down my sexuality. Okay. I'll neuter myself, right? So we get guys who don't function, and then they go off to the side and say, I'll function over here. I'll do my thing over here, right? And so I'll betray the wrong woman, right? So I'm gonna be loyal and betray the woman I should have been betraying over here, right? My mother. I should betray her and say, no, you don't get me. So when we work with these guys, we do a lot of work on helping them take back this sort of unneutered process, which can be done, by the way, I tell this story almost every time I'm interviewed because it's worth a chuckle, but it's not funny if you're in it. But I had 2 consultations with the women, with the men, wives of these men, 2 different workshops. So the workshop is we do, for example, is designed to sort of help these men and women. We have women workshops for women too. Create some real estate. Oh, this is what it's like to feel free. So most of these guys, they could be 45. They don't have a feeling of what it means to be unobligated to the person who I don't know, right? I'm obligated, which is different than empathy. So we like people who are empathic. But these guys are obligated, right? So these women said to me, unsolicited, both of them, they didn't know each other. That was the best sex I ever had with him after the workshop. So I chuckle. I can never promise anybody that. But the point is that by embodying these guys back in themselves, this is my body, Mom, you don't get your hands on it. I now am free. Now, I have no doubt that these guys would struggle a week later, right? They kind of relapse back into it.
Sure.
But it's very dramatic in that it points to the fact that these guys have not embodied themselves because it felt too icky. Oh, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would be, I would just want to check out of all that stuff if I had that complicated relationship with, because it makes me feel like just trying to imagine myself in that kind of position is really, talk about a cold shower. I mean, it's just really like, I can't imagine functioning normally.
But it's also, I think what you're also saying is that being in touch with your sexuality, and not just your sexuality, but also just your healthy ego, like my sense of self, my identity, my individualism, that is dangerous, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Because it would be sort of a threat or even a betrayal to the mother they haven't appropriately thrown over or redefined.
Precisely.
Thanks for watching on YouTube. Remember, you can also enjoy The Jordan Harbinger Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Our podcast feed is a treasure trove of insights from intellectuals, authors, spies, artists, athletes, pioneers, engineers, former mafia bosses, and business leaders, all sharing their secrets to success. For more information, click the link in the description. Now, back to the show. For me, one thing, and tell me if I'm just overanalyzing this here, but it seems like essentially in this situation, you're being abused as a child. But then also it sounds like you're idealizing your parent in all these other ways. So you're idealizing somebody who's also abusing you, which now that I say it out loud is probably more common than one would think with an abusive parent-child relationship.
Yeah. And you wind up learning to tolerate people in your life that really aren't good for you sometimes. Right. So sometimes, so we see 2 extremes in these guys. They either miss a boat and they go, oh my God, I wish I could have committed to her. So we have a section in our workshop about losses, and invariably most of these guys report losing the love of their life.
Sure.
Because they couldn't commit. It's just, it's profoundly sad to listen to.
That is sad.
You know, and I mean, literally the love of my life, and I couldn't commit. You know, and she wanted a commitment from me and I couldn't do it. Or we see the other extreme, right? I keep committing to relationships that I have high tolerance for, but they're not good for me, right?
That's where I was leading with this, right? Because if you're idealizing the abusive parent, do you then bring in that confusion around abuse and love as an adult? So then do I start dating women who are abusing me because that's what normal relationships are like in my pattern, because my mom did that, where she would be like, you're going to eat this and you're going to dress like that and you're not going to go do this. It's like, well, if I date a normal woman and she's not doing that, maybe she doesn't love me. Let me find somebody else who tells me what to do at every moment of the day, including what to eat and how to do my job, you know, whatever it is. Like, you would just recreate that. And then you go, wham, my wife's abusive. But then it's like, well, of course, you filtered out everybody who wasn't treating you poorly. So, of course. And the next person you find is going to do the same thing because that's all you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that certainly happens. You know, we talk about the 3 Ps when we are trying to rectify the past. We may pick somebody. So you're talking about picking a person that resembles our primary abusers in order to sort of work through the past, right? Because it never really happens, although sometimes it does. Or we might project onto them that which isn't there, right? You're always too needy, right? When in fact she's saying, what are you talking about? We've been dating for 4 years. I'm just looking for a commitment here, pal. Right? This is 3 years too long. Or we might provoke them, right? So let's say I do get attached to somebody who's pretty decent, pretty loving, but I betray her. I act out sexually with an affair partner or an escort or do something. Now she becomes a version of my mother, always controlling, always demanding to know where I'm at. But I did that to myself. So usually we see people pursuing the past through one of those 3 Ps, picking somebody, projecting onto them, or provoking them. And you're talking about picking somebody, which is always sticky, because when we hear these guys tell their stories, it's not always clear to us whether they've provoked them or whether or not they've picked them to become that. And sometimes it's water under the bridge. Sometimes it's too late. And divorcing both the mother and the current partner have to become part of the emancipation process, which is worth talking about at some point here, right? I know we got some time yet, but it could be worth looking at, well, what do these guys do?
We're working our way toward that. Absolutely. We're excited.
Okay.
I am curious, though, before we hit that, how did you get interested in this kind of work? Because I know you're a therapist, but it just seems like a very specific niche to get into. Did you just have a bunch of patients like this and you got interested in it, or what?
Well, so there's a couple threads, this won't surprise you, but there was some enmeshment in my family. My mother was Hungarian. They were wonderful, loving, close family, but enmeshed themselves.
Can we pause? I think we might have there's a little thudding.
There's a thumping, yeah.
Oh, that was my foot. Okay,
is that you're nervous? Okay. You're nervously kicking the desk while we're talking about
talking about my mother. She's already dead, but she might come on the show.
Yeah, you never know.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You were speaking so beautifully, and I didn't want it to affect your audio.
Yeah, that's funny that we caught a little nervous tick there. That's normal, actually. Continue, doctor.
So my mother has enmeshed with her parents. So they were first generation Hungarian, and then I kind of trickled down to myself and my brothers. And although my mother and I, towards the end of her life, I had to work hard at differentiating from her, but she was very respectful of the path I chose. So that was sort of behind my work, to be frank with you. The first thing that I noticed professionally, outside of the children that I was working with at Children's Hospital who were school phobic, which is when I first discovered it, is I was working with adults who had grown up in alcoholic families, adult children of alcoholics, common framing that used to be popular for sure in the 80s. And this man was compulsively picking up prostitutes, escorts, sex workers. And he was split between living in his own place and living with his mother, where he had to live in order to do his job, which was in the city. And so while he was living with his mother, he'd be picking up prostitutes. And he said, "What should I do?" I said, "Stop living with your mother." Right? I was early in my professional career. I wasn't aware that you don't always give such direct advice. To my surprise, he stopped. He did it. He moved out, and his compulsion to pick up prostitutes dropped precipitously, like that.
Wow.
It was stunning for me to see that. Now, I understood that we had to work with him long term on keeping boundaries and not re-engaging in that. But the cathartic shift by moving out that decreased his compulsion was dramatic. I wrote my first professional article based on that case. So that was the first sort of dart on the board where I thought, this enmeshment stuff affects sexuality. So one of the things so I just started getting onto that, and I wrote from there. I wrote Silently Seduced not long after that. It just sort of came to me, as they say.
It reminds me of when somebody is getting clean from drugs or alcohol and they're like, don't go back to the same places. And it's like, yeah, don't hang out with my friends who do drugs. And it's like, no, don't even go down the same road. Take a different path to work. You know, it's move out from your mom's house. Well, what does that have to do with me picking up prostitutes? Well, obviously at home, there's some trigger that you can't not run into every single day or every time you do this. So if you move out and you're not hitting that trigger, you just the addiction stuff doesn't necessarily kick off, or it's way less often and easier to break. And it sounds like that's kind of the pattern that we're looking at here. Is it triggers like a sex addiction or some other sort of, I would imagine, triggers all kinds of addictions, right? There's got to be substance abuse problems that go along with this. Like, oh, I drink because I don't know. And it's like, well, you live with your mom and your mom tells you all this icky stuff, and then your wife gets mad at you, and it's like, oh yeah, that might have something to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I think the move out, so we like to use the word ritual space. So these guys don't have much in other words, no space for myself, right? Everybody's crowded into my little center space, right? I'm not alone. I can't be alone. I've never been alone. I don't know who the hell I am. And so, and mother is central to that space, right? But if I move out, now I can breathe, right? Now I have a ritual space in which she's not intruding. So my need to escape diminishes. So that's what you just described, is that if I'm at home, my sense of sacred space, ritual space, safety is always being intruded on, right? So if I'm calling my mother 5 times a day, or she's texting me 10 times a day, or my father or family, and I never feel a separateness, right? I don't want to answer every one of your texts here, right? And if I don't answer, it doesn't mean I don't love you, right? So please don't say that again. Right. So these guys can't do that. They can't really set boundaries like that. So there's no spatial separateness. There's no breathing space. So the need to escape addictions become a primary way to do that. Or I just shut down and I avoid everybody, right? I isolate and I don't get involved in friendships or romances because, as you said earlier, I just shut the whole thing down, right?
I'm glad we're talking about this. I would love to explore for a moment some of the non-romantic impacts of covert incest. You know, we've talked about the dating stuff, the sex addiction stuff, but I would love to hear a little bit about how children of these parents navigate things like friendships, careers, creative pursuits, the world in general. You touch on both of your books on a number of interesting themes: indecision, fear, ambivalence, an inability to know how they really feel about a topic or an issue or a person. Sometimes it's even difficult to make a basic decision, you know, like, do I do this or do I do that? Do I go to this restaurant or do I go to the beach? And also procrastination. Can you talk about that? Why do those qualities develop in children like this?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. You just, again, outlined another series of eye color symptoms in the group, right? So we got 95% of the guys will report what you just described. So let's think about that for a minute, right? If you're this sensitive, empathic boy who doesn't want your mommy, again, we're focusing on men and the mothers, but we can cross genders and so forth. Let's just remind people to do that. You're absorbing the dominant emotional landscape of your parent, and yours is being subjugated, right? Your needs and wants, you begin to set them aside. I don't want to upset mommy. I really want to play football, but she doesn't want me to play football, or whatever the issue is, right? And so I begin this process early on in my development, and early development's critical for this, of losing my voice in the service of allowing mother to have her voice in my presence. And so when it comes time for me to intuitively or instinctively know how to make a move, this is the career I want, I'm going to take my chances. We got guys who have built careers based on what their mothers want. They're changing careers when they're 45 because they realize this is not what I've wanted to do, right? And so you can get dramatic examples like that all the way to, I can't decide what dinner I want to go to tonight because I don't really know who I am. I don't know what my needs are. And if I get to what I really want, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint somebody. So I'm going to move away from that and remain ambivalent or placating or people pleasing. And I won't I won't really assert what I want. In fact, I've lost track of what I want. So ambivalence, indecision, self-doubt becomes sort of this repetition in me around multiple topics, all the way from, and also friendships. I wind up getting friendships where I'm always the one doing the work, right? My buddy's not reciprocating or taking me to a ball game or whatever it is, right? And so, sometimes we get friendships in which they're, and other things can cause this, but we sometimes wind up creating friendships in which I'm doing all the heavy lifting, right? And so, because my value is what I can give to you, how I can support you, not what's good for the both of us here, or what I want. It's you can say what you want without being narcissistic. I'd really like to go to the Thai restaurant, right? How about you? What do you want to do this time? Okay, you want to go to this. Well, this time we'll go here. Next time we'll go to Thai, right? So that ability to negotiate preferences and needs in relationships, from friendships to careers to romances, is really burdened by, I don't get a vote. In fact, I've lost the fact that I even can vote. I don't even know who I am. I don't know. So if you ask these guys what they want, they don't know what they want. It's sad. They might have a very specific career. So sometimes you can see somebody who's managed a career, and maybe they've got a career that they really like, and they've found some way to find, and they just are kind of locked into that. That's the one thing they know. It's the one thing they can hang on to. It's the one thing they can identify with. But if you move them outside that path, they start to get a little wobbly about who they are and where they end. So you're right. It's we all need an intuitive sense of self, right? When some decisions require, it just feels right? I remember my son, his first car. He says, "Well, I'd like a sports car for my first car." I said, "No, man, that's not going to happen." And so he had it all laid out, how I was going to save money and gas and insurance 5 years down the road. So he had a little PowerPoint presentation, and I said to him, "No, bud, I'm sorry, that's not happening." He goes, "It just doesn't feel right. Sometimes you make decisions because it's based on a feeling." So you lose the ability to do that when you are absorbed by somebody else's feelings and needs. And so that's the reason for that ambivalence, uncertainty, indecision.
Which would make uncertainty and crises and wide open ocean very anxiety provoking for a child of this template, I would imagine. In Silently Seduced, you wrote that the adult covert incest victim remains stuck in a pattern of living aimed at keeping the special relationship going with the opposite sex parent. It is a pattern of always trying to please mommy and daddy. A privileged and special position is maintained, the pain and suffering of a lost child denied. Separation never occurs, and feelings of being trapped in the psychological marriage deepen. This interferes with the victim's capacity for healthy intimacy and sexuality, in addition to all of the other things you just mentioned. So we've talked a lot about
that. That's well put. I wrote
yeah,
that.
You're not bad. You should look into writing more.
Time for a new edition. We've talked a lot about what covert incest does to people. I think we need to talk about how to recover from it. What does healing from this look like?
Well, I think doing what you guys are doing, first of all, education. You guys are doing a great service here. Somebody out there is going to hear this, and it's going to change your lives.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Way to go, guys.
We're going to get emails about this. Like, I never knew that this was it, but this is it. I totally have this relationship with my mom or dad.
It is a slice of the pie, right?
Yeah.
I can't keep up with it. We have a workshop every month. I get emails from all around the world. It just can't keep up with it. So the first order of business is to come to some awareness of what is the truth, and to break through the denial, and to realize that what you've been calling love is not love. And it's a hard pill to swallow. But unless you can face that, everything else becomes too problematic, right? If you don't confront the belief system and see the reality for what it is, you can't really set a boundary. But if I come to terms with the fact that, well, at some level, sure, my mother probably loved me, but what she's doing now is not love. And this is transactional obligatory assignment, in that love is a currency to get me to not leave her. It's not really love. Now I can better begin to think about setting a boundary. So challenge the belief system, confront the denial, educate yourself, and be prepared to give over the responsibility to the parent to manage the loss. Kids are supposed to emancipate from their parents and move on. It doesn't mean they don't circle back. We hope that our kids do, right? That was my son
come
who
home for
called me.
Christmas.
Right,
But,
right. That was my son who called me right there. So he's calling to consult on something. You know? So the less I say, the more he wants to.
That's right.
circle
Just
back,
reject
right?
that. I'm busy. I'm doing something important. What do you want? Yeah.
So you confront the belief. You confront the belief. You break through the denial. You educate yourself, and you shift the responsibility in your mind to your parent. This is not my job. Take care of you, and you don't worry about negotiating it. So emancipation is not a negotiation. You do not need your parents' co-signature on this. It'd be nice to get their blessing, but don't go into family therapy or therapy with your mother. It'll feel like couples therapy.
Oh, man.
We have some guys who leave the workshop and they go in the therapist who best intention but misses the point, brings the mother into the therapy session, and it feels like it's marital therapy with my mother.
Oh, man.
And the guy relapses into sex addiction the next day, man.
Oh, man.
It's declaring that, look at mom, I know you've been having a hard time with your life with dad, but things are going to change. I know you love me, so you define it for her. I know you love me, but things are going to be different. I got to put my energy in my life, in my career, my wife, my kids. We're going to shift things around. And I'm going to trust that you're going to figure out a way to deal with it because you say you love me. So you have to step up and have a position of emancipation.
But there's an interesting tension here because you talk a lot about assigning responsibility to the parent, holding them accountable. But how do you hold a parent like this accountable in cases where they don't even realize that this is what they were doing?
Well, so so when I say this, I'm saying this more from the perspective of an internal dialogue with the self. More than I am an external negotiation, right? So there has to be an internal shift in the belief system, in the way that you narrate your story, right? Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about changing the narrative of how you hold your life story. Everybody's got a story, right? You guys got a story. I have a story. We all have a story to tell. It has to change, and you change it internally. My job is not to carry my mother's disappointment for her. It's her spiritual assignment to figure this out before she dies, not mine. Right? That's between her and her God, not me. Right? So you change the internal dialogue, and then the external is limited. The external, it might mean a position. It might mean, look, we got to change things. We're not vacationing every year in Cancun with you anymore. We're going on our own vacation, but these enmeshed systems have everybody's like an amoeba, right? And so sometimes the emancipation is just a declaration occasionally about what I'm doing differently. I won't be visiting this Christmas, or we're staying in the motel down the street. No more staying in the house, by the way. So you'll begin to need boundaries. So belief system, internal shift, boundaries, and then commitments to yourself, to your partner, right? These are my priorities.
You also talk a lot about the role of grief in recovery. What do these people need to grieve exactly, and what does that grief look like?
Actually, can I step in real quick on the boundaries thing before we get to the grief?
Sure.
Okay, do I confront my mom on this, or my dad, or whatever? And what if they're dead? Then what? I mean, you don't really need a boundary from a dead person, but you kind of do, because if they're this ghost in your mind that's telling you, like, your wife's not good for you, what do you do with that?
Yeah, so that's the business of the therapy world, right? So, that's what our business is about, is sort of activating, experientially bringing to light into feeling that internal presence, and doing the job of confrontation therapeutically, right? So you're shifting the emotional landscape and narrative enough times and enough protest that you can start to breathe. And should that translate to a confrontation with your parents? I would say in general, not necessarily. So this is not about going home and grabbing your parents by the lapels and shaking them and saying, look at you guys smothered me. I want my own life. It's having your own life and letting them deal with it, right? You got to get away, because what happens is if you go and you start getting enraged with your parents, you're going to provoke your guilt. And once you provoke your guilt, you're going to wind up resubmitting yourself back to your parents. So you have to be careful about how you declare your independence. So now it might be, if you've got parents who will listen, who are, there are some parents, we always like to say that the best you can hope for is your parents will resign themselves to keeping their mouth shut, which, if they're smart, that's what they'll do, right? They don't want to lose you. They want you to circle back. If they can get it, if I had more time, I would do a workshop for parents, and I would say, look, it's in your best interest. I don't have, my son and I used to play baseball all the time together, play catch every day. It's not his thing anymore, right? But he's a young man now, right? So we have a different relationship. So your kids will circle back to you if you get out of the way, right? So your job is to keep moving forward and letting your parent or parents deal with the loss, right? And not do too much negotiation about that. But it might mean that you could say, things are changing. I'm putting more emphasis in my life. I just want you to know I won't be responding as frequently to emails or texts. Doesn't mean X, Y, or Z. So you could make a declarative position, but know that it's not going to go far, right? You can't use it to get assurance that it's okay. So if you're doing that to get your parents to say, good for you, don't do it, because it's not coming.
Yeah, it's gotta be so hard to do that, right? Because you're in this weirdly, you're in a position that seems like it's privileged and special. You're mommy's special boy. So you don't really want to lose that at some level, I assume. But then also you're like, oh, and by the way, I'm not going to Cancun with you. I'm going on vacation with my wife because we're normal adults, or we're trying to be. And it's like, that's not really gonna fly if you're mommy's special boy and you're trying to be this, and then you're also like, and by the way, I'm going to have my own life with my wife, and you're going to lose your pseudo boyfriend, partner, or whatever that you've had since I was born. I can't imagine that going over too well. And that sort of leads me to wonder if people recover 100% from this, or will children of these parents always at some level wrestle with these feelings and conflicts, even if the parent dies and is like, I forgive you. Do you still, guilt is really hard to shed. It's really, really hard to get rid of entirely.
Yeah. So you're right. It's a one day at a time deal, right? You can keep creating real estate and spaces at which you're free, but you're always going to be provoked into some degree of relapse around that. You have to keep coming back to remind yourself about the freedom that you have a right to and deserve. So you've always got to, have your private little dialogue with your mother, whether she's dead or not, and say, I need you out of the room, right? So sometimes, we'll have guys come in who they don't even have a sense of space. We'll have guys come into the practice, for example, and we don't come in and let them bring their spouses in to the same session, because they've never had a space just for them. So practicing over and over again the ritual of space that's mine becomes a necessary piece. And that is probably ongoing. So the longer the earlier this stuff occurred in childhood, the longer it's gone on, the deeper the template.
Wow. So cutting it off when you're 20 and you move out and you're like, wow, I'm weird because of this, is going to be easier than trying to do it when you're 45 and you're married with 2 kids. It's going to be, I guess that makes complete sense, right? Just you can restart your life when you're 20 if you want to. It's a lot harder when you're married with 2 kids and you're in your 40s, I would imagine.
One of the big consequences of covert incest is feeling objectified and used, as we talked about, not loved unconditionally, right? how does a person,
Not love for love's sake. I like the phrase "not love for love's sake."
I like that too, not love for love's sake. So how does a person cultivate or rediscover that feeling of being loved for love's sake, or even being worthy of that love?
That's a big question. I'm probably not gonna have a very good answer for you, but let me give it a whirl. So first of all, I think we need to confront the faulty belief system so that they understand that their transactional currency love was not really love. So that's the first order of business. So assuming that's essentially challenged and out of the way, I think it becomes a daily practice and being around people who are reciprocal, right? So Pat Carnes, who did all the work, he's still around, he's still doing work on sexual addiction, said in recovery, relationships change or they end. I always like that phrase. In recovery, relationships, you can't be in recovery from drug and sex addiction or alcohol and sex addiction and keep going to Las Vegas with your buddies, right? It just relationships change or they end. There's no middle ground here. I think this is true here, that you start cultivating relationships that are reciprocal, in which you're not the only one providing the service to the other, so that you can begin to feel what it's like to have somebody hold you lovingly and to permit yourself to do the same, right? Because the other thing that gets in the way, and I remember this with my mother, when she passed, I was in a lot of grief, even though we had done better. We had some different boundaries. I had boundaries, I should say. I don't know if she did. And so I had a lot of grief about regret. And I thought, you know what? That's not on me. She got in the way. You talked about grief earlier. One of the things that's lost here for the son is he doesn't get that sweet, loving connection that I watch my son have with my wife, right? Sometimes my son will turn to my wife for counsel more than me, right? And so that's lost to this man. And it's not on him. It's on the mother. The parent's job is to get out of the way so the kid can come back around and love them differently. So, I would say surround yourself with people who can be reciprocal, and so that you can begin to take a chance on loving, because it's hard to do, right? If you've been, I know we're getting to the end here, but if you've been suffocated and engulfed and enmeshed, opening your heart up's not an easy job, right? And so, needing to learn that you can open yourself up to somebody romantically, lovingly, sexually, merge with them, and then unhook and come back, let yourself miss each other, right? So guys who have been enmeshed don't know that dance. They think they've always got to be emerged with their lovers, right? And they don't, and then separateness means I never come back. But the dance of intimacy for these enmeshed guys is to learn to move in and merge and collapse, but come back out. In and come back out. And not to bring the lover with you and have her collapse in your sacred space, but to move into a different space with her. So it's a tough dance, but it is the dance that we see that works.
So this is going to sound a little weird, Dr. Adams, but there are some benefits that come from this level of enmeshment / trauma. It seems to me, based on your books, that people who have these parents often tend to be very empathic. They can be very good listeners. They can be excellent caretakers, which in certain situations can be very helpful or useful, sometimes
they
beautiful.
become therapists.
There's some beauty to that level of care, but obviously it can become compulsive. It can come at the cost of the person. It can become a whole identity. How do you break out of that mold? Can people with these parents stop living up to the expectations of other people and start living for themselves? How do they do that without losing some of these admirable qualities?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's start with, though, I'll answer it this way. Remember, I think the empathy precedes the role. I think most of these people are naturally so temperamentally empathic. Some kids are more, roll off your back, screw you, I don't want to deal with it, right? There's a little more punch to their temperament. I think the empathy is temperamental and also developmental. So yes, I do think these roles increase caring and empathy. So I like to use this phrase that I think you have to learn to regulate your empathy. You can't give it away to everybody. When I work with therapists are always burned out by the end of the day, right? You give yourself to 8 people in a session. And this was one of my experiences. I come home from work and I didn't want to talk to my wife or my son. I was just burned out. So you have to learn to I can care and feel for you, but I'm not giving it all to you. Learning to regulate the empathy is your key. Mom, I love you. I care about you, but I'm not going to listen to your problems with Dad anymore. You got to work it out with him. I'm sorry. How's the weather? Right? So regulating how much you give. I only have this much in the tank, and it's all you're going to get. Learning to do that becomes a skill that helps you navigate so that you don't feel depleted in relationships.
Dr. Adams, thank you so much. Really interesting world of, it's a world I didn't know existed. And I think a lot of people probably didn't know they were even in these kinds of relationships with a parent. So I think it's really informative and very helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. You guys did great. Love working with you.
Thank you for checking out this entire episode on YouTube. If you want to follow up on this topic, check out our podcast feed or visit us on our website at jordanharbinger.com, where you can learn more about our guest and dive even deeper into what we discussed today. And remember, YouTube is not the only place that you can check out The Jordan Harbinger Show. Any podcast app should have us. Check out the links in the description where you will find access to our shows that don't appear on YouTube, like Skeptical Sunday, where we debunk topics like crystal healing, GMOs, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, tipping, even lawns, to find out if they're backed by science and logic, or if they're just complete nonsense. Spoiler, many of them are complete nonsense. Also, our Feedback Friday shows where we help people escape from cults, get raises at work, and take all manner of questions from you, the audience, all the way down to the bottom of the barrel. Every episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show has something useful you can take away and apply in your own life and help you navigate what I know can often seem like the overwhelming and paralyzing challenges of modern life. Life can be hard, yes, but we are here to help. And if you appreciate how we help, remember to like, comment, and subscribe.